that the illegal activity is taking place because there is no evidence. It could be your sister, it could be your mother, it could be your aunt. A whole range of issues comes up.
And there is a great deal of ethnic diversity out at the Mall of America because it attracts people from all over the world.
All over the world.
Yeah, major shopping areas. So it's not unusual to have different languages, different looking people than your basic Minnesotan there, if there is such a thing as a basic Minnesotan anymore.
But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to pinpoint that who's been actually trafficked. Whereas if you have drugs, you have evidence. If you have a gun or a weapon, you have evidence. Whereas human body, it's really hard to prove it. Even the individual wants to go and ask for help. The traffickers have controlled them in such a unique way that they even think that they are not victimized by this process.
So I heard a thing on public radio this week about human trafficking. They said a number of interesting things that I want to ask you about. But one of the things that was discussed is whether or not it's increasing in this period of time with the economic struggles. You know, that I mean, there was a lot of human trafficking 150 years ago.
Sure.
We called it slavery.
Yeah, Atlantic slave trade.
And that what somebody was saying is that they were giving the opinion that it had decreased somewhat and that it's increasing. Do you agree with that?
I don't have any research to back it up, but I tend to agree with the increasing numbers of activity is taking place. And the slave itself, I think the slave trade is actually increasing because of the globalization. The whole world wants to come to America. That's a big factor.
Why? Never mind, you don't have to answer that.
The roads are paved with goals, and I'm still looking for that road.
Are you looking?
And a globalization factor, we tend to look at more negative aspect of it. Social media, it's a big thing. It's easy to stay connected with anyone, anywhere in the world, and providing a false documents and saying, come to America. Good example. If I were to go to Nepal and say, wow, you have a beautiful daughter. I would like to marry her and I would like to take her to America. And you would say, sure. And I would go to your house.
Oh, I'd probably want to know more about you, but...
That's Western concept.
Yeah,
Whereas we're looking at the country where it's a poverty, it's increasing, social, the development is decreasing. So, and a patriarchal society, of course, we have to, that's a big factor. So I would go to 10 different households and 10 different girls, they don't know each other, they will come to America. When they come to America, I am not a nice guy, so my sole purpose is to introduce sexual exploitation or labor work within the households for my own personal gain.
So when you say labor work within a household, it would be like a au pair or a housekeeper, whatever you want to do, or babysit.
Nannies are a big thing. Any labor within the household is taking care of everything from 10 to 12 hours a day. And they don't have any access to go outside of their household. And you will see that more prevalent within the diplomatic community. Any of the diplomatic community, they can bring X numbers of servant, they call them, as helper.
But they're not paying them.
They are not paying them, and U.S. government not necessarily has a right to go into those compound because of the different agreements. So they have been exploited over and over and over. False H-1B, which is a work visa. A lot of people would apply. Educated masses would apply to come to America to find a right job. By the time they get here, H-1 is false, the company doesn't exist. So what happens? Either they become the victimized through their own that company or that agent, or they will have to get involved in the different activities. The cycle is like this.
So they're coming over to work in the computer industry because there's a need, so it's easier to become employed through the visa requirements
Sure.
as a computer person. Well, you come over here and the headhunter doesn't have a company you're going to work for.
Right.
So you might have a very skilled person who has an advanced degree, think they're going to be a computer person,
Right.
and they end up working at the sewage treatment plant. For an example, I have no proof that they're doing it, but they're working someplace. They're not getting the wage that a person with an IT background would have, but they're probably getting minimum wage or less. Or they end up in someone's household as a keeper of the family house or
That's
kids.
exactly right. So what happens is, you will see that a lot in massage parlors. Do you go get your hair cut in a beauty salon?
I do.
Yeah.
You notice he asked you, he didn't ask me.
You get your hair cut in a beauty salon?
I'm not answering.
I actually get my hair cut by a barber.
Oh, that's wonderful. Because often in a hair salon, you will see some individuals who get paid minimum wage. And
What about fingernail people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's another industry that is increasing, and right here in Minnesota.
So back up. So they're getting paid minimum wage. You consider that a trafficked individual?
If they are brought here with a false pretense, and they were, how do you say, they were offered a different job, and they end up working in a minimum wage or even very little in an unworking, inhumane condition environment, 20 hours a day, no networks of friends, no connection outside world, and that's what you will see throughout.
So it's a bait and switch. I mean, like if you were going in to buy a car, you think you were going to buy this, you end up driving out with a car with you thought you were buying a 4-cylinder or an 8-cylinder, and you go with a 4.
Yeah.
You've actually switched what you went in to get.
Well, I understand, and it sounds like fraud, but I'm pushing on whether or not this is human trafficking or somebody making a bad decision, and then
Okay.
trying to find it. And I'm playing a little devil's advocate here, but I want to push on why we call this trafficking.
The definition right here is defines, the United Nations defines human trafficking as trafficked is defined as a recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, manipulation, or capturing of individuals for sexual or labor exploitation through force, fraud, and coercion. And if any of those things have involved in that individual from point A to point B, and it goes on and says individual for involuntary servitude,
Which is
slavery. Slavery, sexual exploitation, which is basically doing something they would not normally volunteer to do, or even debt bondage. So let's say, Judge Gary, I brought you to America, so you owe me $50,000. But I'm going to give you a job. I paid you $5 an hour.
So I can work it off.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll be done.
But
in a
I
few
also have to
years.
pay for everything else that
Transportation, food, and housing. So they may not necessarily be the sexual exploited
I understand.
Yes. So UN defines fraud, force, manipulation, false promises. That if and when those adjectives were used for those individuals to control and manipulate, and that is defined as human trafficking. However, we don't have a luxury, like you and I cannot say that person has been trafficked. The trafficking component has to come from law enforcement agency. They will have FBI, CIA, ICE, Homeland Security, local police, and different service providers like Catholic Charities. They would come together saying this individual is, in fact, been trafficked.
Okay, so how does, you mentioned Catholic Charities where you work. How does somebody find you? They've been working in a house in Minneapolis on the lakes, I'm picking on Minneapolis, for 10 years, taking care of the children, the dog, the garden, the house, the laundry, the kitchen, the cooking, the shopping.
Sure.
Do you have a number like for traffic? Something that's catchy that you can do? I mean, you have a number of 673-34-3100, and you have a website, but
Right. What helps is shows like this. Hopefully, when they're working inside the house, hopefully they have an opportunity to look at